Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. On this podcast, we are talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I'm your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is ANN Profiles. Today, I have with me my friend, Gary Krause. He is the director of the Office of Adventist Mission. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming to meet with me. I know that I'm going to say it. You're a little hesitant about coming because although we enjoy talking to each other, sometimes telling our life stories, people think they'll be bored or maybe they're not that exciting. So I told you I'll be the judge of that by the end of this episode here. I think I'm going to be delighted by your story.
At the end, I'll ask you, and you may be very disappointed.
I don't think I will. Because I've heard some of your life story, because our daughters have been friends. We have gotten together as families, and I heard about you and your wife. Spoiler alert, you have a child and a wife. And so I heard your love story. So I know that you have some fun stories in there. But I always like to start this podcast where it all began, which was birth. Mm-hmm. So tell me, where were you born? Tell me a little bit about your parents.
Okay, so I was born back in the 1920s. No, not quite that long. Okay.
See, I can already tell you this is going to be a fun podcast episode.
So I was born in Fiji, which is one of the South Pacific region islands, and my parents were missionaries there from Australia. My father was teaching at Fulton College. And so I emerged in Suva back when? Yeah.
We're going to leave it at back when?
We'll leave
1920.
It back when.
Close enough. Decided it wasn't
Close
1920.
Enough, yeah.
Well, since you have a teenage daughter, I know it wasn't 1920. So
that's true, safe. But she was our gift from God in my old age. So, yeah.
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
So you're born in Fiji, which is a place most people have heard of,
yes,
but have never been to. So how many years were you in Fiji?
Well, I think I left before I was 1 year of age. So
so you don't remember Fiji.
So I can only remember it from photos and from going back there. So,
what did your parents do when they were serving as missionaries?
Dad was a teacher, yeah. And then Mum tried to wrestle my brother and me into proper submission. At least my brother. I was okay, yeah.
You're always perfect.
Yeah.
What did your father teach?
That's a good question. I think it was like English, history, Bible, those sorts of things, yeah.
Okay.
I didn't actually sit in the classroom at that stage.
So you're not really
wasn't
sure.
One. Yeah.
Most 1-year-olds don't.
Although he did teach me when I was in high school. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to be a fun. See, I'm already telling you, your life is already fun.
Thank you.
So you leave Fiji. Where do we land?
So I went back to Australia where Dad taught at Avondale College, and then went to New Zealand where Dad was teacher, then principal at Longburn Adventist College.
So how long were you in Avondale?
It's probably like a year or two.
Okay, so you were like 2 again.
Yeah,
so you're not remembering these
I remember New
Zealand.
Zealand. New Zealand.
So New Zealand is our first
yes.
memories. Are there really as many sheep in New Zealand as everyone
yes.
talks about?
There's more.
There's more than what we talk
yes.
about. So what was your best friend's sheep's name? No, I'm just joking. So you were raised more in New Zealand. These are the first memories that you have.
Yeah, so we were there for 8 years. And, of course, Longburn had a beautiful campus, and I just roamed freely. Mum would say, see you later in the morning, and she'd see me late that afternoon. And so I had the freedom of the campus, the dairy farm, even the river down the road, all sorts of things.
So Longburn, did you say it was a college?
Yeah.
Okay, so Adventist College?
Yes.
Okay, I've never heard of Longburn. Is it still called Longburn?
I'm here to serve. I can teach you things, Alyssa. Yes, it's Longburn Adventist College, and it's still there.
Okay. See, I love this because I'm actually, as I'm interviewing people, I'm learning about all sorts of different educational institutions I've never heard of. So this has actually always been a very fun exploration for me here. So because you're at Longburn, it seems like that would be, you left maybe like when you were 10 or 11. So your early school years would have been while you were in New Zealand, correct?
Yeah.
Did you go to an Adventist school? So tell me a little bit about that.
So it was at Palmerston North, which is the closest town to Longburn. And I guess my earliest memories are of sitting on a heated floor because it was cold in New Zealand. I remember learning the haka, which is the Maori dance. I remember learning about the culture of...
Can you still do that?
Only for selected friends.
So we aren't going to probably be able to pull that off for this.
No danger. Yeah. Yeah, so I remember good teachers. I can remember teachers who had an influence on me even at that young age. And
in what way?
Just, I think of one of my teachers, Mr. Rosendahl, who was very patient, very kind, and listened to my side of the story, if anything. Not that I got into much trouble, but he always listened to my side of the story. So, yeah.
So what was it like? I mean, you said, you had kind of free range of the campus and stuff like that. But what was it like to be raised in this Adventist kind of bubble, this Adventist community? Tell me a little bit about that experience.
I never thought of it as an Adventist community. I never thought of it as an Adventist bubble. I just thought, this is life. This is, how people live. And I just enjoyed every second of it. The only thing that was a bit of a challenge for me was I had asthma when I was a kid, pretty badly. And I would have many days at home. And back then they didn't have the understanding of asthma like they do today. And so I remember sitting reading books during school time at home in front of a coal fire, and coal is probably the worst thing you can be inhaling when you've got asthma, so things like that. So I remember that. I also came down with meningeal encephalitis, and I was hospitalized.
Explain to us what that is.
It's kind of like some sort of a brain, I guess, inflammation that can be pretty dangerous. So I was hospitalized with that for quite a while.
How old were you?
Guessing I was probably 6 or 7, something like that. So all that combined with the good times and the happy times and the outside times, I still have that memory of childhood sickness, which was fairly dominant in my life, which I'd forgotten about until you start asking me about it.
This is actually, somebody told me, they're like, this is like the greatest therapy session. It was like, I wasn't trying to. It's interesting because as we kind of start to recount the ways that God has worked and just our life stories, I find that often we start to remember things that we don't think about that can make us grateful. But because we don't continuously talk about them, we kind of forget where we've come from and all of these things. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about telling our stories and sharing them. Yeah. So
another memory I have of... Sorry, Alyssa.
No, go for it. I want to hear it. You can interrupt anytime you want, Gary.
Thank you. Another memory I have is it was a week of prayer for the students at Longburn College. And so of an evening, my mother would take my brother and me to the week of prayer. And it was actually being taken by my uncle, who was the youth director for the division. And I can still remember sitting on my mother's knee in my pajamas, listening every night. And then at the last evening, Uncle Ken said, "Is there anyone here who wants to say something for Jesus?" And I can still remember my heart thumping. And I thought, I want to say something for Jesus. So I got off my mother's knee and I walked down the middle aisle of the church. And I can imagine all the students laughing at the principal's kid walking down in his pajamas. And I was too short for the pulpit. So Uncle Ken reached down, picked me up and held me up to the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces and I went, and then I burst into tears. That was my first testimony for Jesus.
It was very moving.
Yes.
Did you get any words out?
None. In fact, not one word, just the tears.
So, I mean, it was a few years ago, just a few here. But was it crying out of fear? Or do you think it was actually because your heart had been so compelled that it was kind of like almost hard to articulate what you were trying to say?
I think it was both, yeah.
So how old were you when that happened? I'm
guessing I was 7, maybe.
So at 7, your heart was...
My first public testimony.
Yeah, but we're kind of laughing and not really. But at 7, the Holy Spirit was literally working so heavily in you that although there was fear, there was also just like, I don't even know how to express how I feel. That actually tells a lot about actually your upbringing that at the age of 7, you wanted to publicly say something
I guess so.
about Jesus. So let's actually talk a little bit about that. Like, because to me, that's actually a pretty amazing story. I don't think anybody I've interviewed so far at the age of 7 was wanting to speak boldly about Jesus. What was your home life? Your home life like? Yeah, I got those two words swapped there. That you think made your heart already that susceptible to the influence of the Spirit?
I had very committed Christian parents. So we would have family worship every day. We would have Christian books to read. So I was always reading Destiny books and whatever that coming out from Review and Herald and whatever. And so we had that. Then there was not a church meeting that my father did not attend. So prayer meeting, we were there. Obviously Sabbath school and church. And if it was an afternoon meeting, no excuses, we'll be there. If there's a Saturday night program, we'll be there. So the church was our life. And so we supported everything that the church did. If there was in-gathering where we would go and collect money for missions, we were there. So it was an environment where this is the most important thing. So we were praying every day for the missionaries in the islands. Having come from Fiji, I had a Fiji passport. And I said, I'm always going to have this passport because if in the future Fiji closes off and they don't let foreigners coming in, I'll be able to go in and be a missionary. So that was the sort of context that I came from.
Do you still have the Fijian passport?
As I grew older, it became clear that as I traveled, it was better to have an Australian passport. So I eventually relinquished that. Yeah.
Got it. So something else I'm gathering already just from this very short period is that actually serving the church is in your family's blood.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, my mother's father was a pastor. My mother's brother was a pastor. Dad was brought up by a single mother, and he was a teacher in the school system. He became a pastor later. So it was very much, this is what you do, and perhaps we'll come to it later, because when it came to my career choice, the last thing I wanted to do was become a pastor. Because I guess it was because this is what is expected almost, I don't know, but that's the way it was. But it's very much, we're here to serve. That's our role.
And as a young person, though, there wasn't, at least in these early years, maybe, there wasn't this resentment. You liked serving and being a part of this community.
Loved it. Yeah, couldn't have been better. Strict churchgoers, strict Sabbath school, study the Sabbath school lesson, attend every meeting. I loved it.
I love that.
Yeah.
So you're about 10 years old and you end up leaving New Zealand and you go where?
Australia.
All right. So we go to Australia.
Yeah.
Now, were both of your parents Australian?
Yes.
Okay. So you were born in Fiji, had the Fijian passport, but you could be Australian.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put all this one here together.
Yeah.
So you go back to Australia and back to Avondale? Or where
No, so just north, probably 2 hours north of Sydney is a place called Newcastle. Mm-hmm. And that's where Dad was the principal of the school there. And that's where I did my high school and my university.
So let's talk about the high school years of Gary Krause.
Oh, no.
So Gary, obviously you've had this pretty positive experience. During the high school years, we kind of talk about, for some people, that can maybe be a little more rebellious. Uh-huh. What were your high school years like?
They were good. I was never outwardly rebellious, so I didn't take up smoking or drinking or smoking dope or any of that sort of stuff. But inside, I struggled to make this my own. So I brought up in an Adventist family. So I started having questions about our beliefs, etc., and whatnot. But I tended to internalize it, so I tended to wrestle with it within. So it wasn't a question of I went through this big rebellious stage. It was just I went through a questioning stage.
And you say you kind of internalized it and wrestled with it. A lot of young people are struggling these days, and they aren't really sure who to ask. And even if they do ask, sometimes they're blown off. And some people are just internalizing this kind of thing. What do you think while you're struggling and going through all of this internally, what do you think it was that kept you anchored, that would pull you back?
There's a sociologist, Peter Berger, who wrote about plausibility structures, and he was saying that any belief system, you need a structure of support around you. And for me, just the simple thing of going to church every Sabbath, every Friday night there was a youth meeting, there were people there who enveloped me in love. It just kept me afloat, just to hear other people talking about their faith, reaffirming mine, those sorts of things, I think, reinforced, strengthened, gave me the foundation I needed.
So in high school, were you a sport person or music person? Tell me a little bit about the teenage Gary Krause.
Cricket and soccer.
Cricket. There's a cricket field near my house.
Yes.
And I see it.
Do you play?
I think that, I know is it wickets? Is that what
Very
these
good.
things are called?
Yes.
Do you run back and forth between the wickets?
You do, in fact. Yes, you do.
So you have very high, so is it kind of like you wait for it to be thrown, so you run back and forth as many times as you can? Or what is I know we're not here for learning about cricket, but give me a little bit of a thing, because it's something that has captured my attention.
If you hit the ball, you can run for as long as you want, as long as they don't catch you or they don't knock down your wicket. So you have to be back at one of those wickets before they hit it with a ball. Simple. You understand it.
That is actually very simple.
Good.
I like it. So yeah, I see them out there every weekend playing.
Maybe Southern Asians, right?
Yes, it is. I've heard that this is the longest game ever. It's not like one of these things where it's 9 innings. It's you can play the game and one weekend and you're still playing it the next weekend.
There are various forms of cricket. There's one-day cricket, there's shorter versions, but there's also test cricket, which can go for 5 days.
Oh, that's a lot of cricket.
It is a lot of cricket.
I'll have to go and actually sit on a blanket now and watch them
and
play
learn.
cricket.
Become civilized. Yes, good.
Become very civilized. I'll bring my tea.
Well, it's not like baseball, which is like watching grass grow, right?
Oh, okay. So, and this is way tangential. Although this is supposed to be just conversation between you and I, right? So my husband took me to a baseball game one time. I was so bored. If you're there for 4 hours, honestly, there's only action for 20 minutes of the whole entire thing.
I rest my case.
It was tedious. And I've now told him that the greatest gift I can give him is to allow him to take someone else who appreciates it. And rather than buy really good seats and go with someone who appreciates it, than for me to come, because I will just...
You'll be a drag.
It's not enjoyable. It's just not enjoyable to me at all. But he loves it. Good. And so I think he actually took one of my daughters this summer because Alyssa won't be going with him. So I love him. If he really wanted me to, I probably would. But that's okay. We just tangented. So you said cricket, and what was the other one?
Soccer.
I don't even remember. Soccer.
Yeah.
Okay, so football.
Yeah.
Soccer.
Yes.
Whatever we call it.
Same one.
Wherever you are, whatever country, that's what we're talking about. Yeah. So you were a sport person.
Yes.
And did your school have teams?
Yes.
And was it competitive or intramural-ish? Or?
Yeah, we used to play against other Adventist schools. Yeah.
So were you good at it?
I can't say.
You can say.
No.
You know if you were good.
No,
Gary.
I was passable.
You were passable?
Yeah.
Okay. So I vote to have you on my team.
Thank you.
Then I won't.
Thank you very much.
Maybe feel as bad. Okay, so you kind of get through the high school years. You're doing this inner wrestling. Has this wrestling been solved by the time you go to college, or?
No, it's still there. Yeah.
And where do you go to college?
I went to a public university in Newcastle, University of Newcastle, and
what were you going to be?
Academic.
Just a standard academic. It might be in English or math, or you didn't know what? Just
English, history, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. So how did you make that decision? Because I know you said you were not going to be a pastor, but what led you down the road of academic?
I just loved writing. I liked teaching, at least the idea of teaching, and I guess I wanted to be a writer. When I was in New Zealand as a kid, I wrote to the editor of the South Pacific Record, which was the division paper, asking, what do I have to do to get your job when I'm older? so
Did they respond?
He wrote back a lovely letter, and he actually told me to go to Avondale College, train as a teacher so you get a good rounded education. So I ignored that for the first couple of years, went to university, got my degree there, but then I went to Avondale. Deeply suspicious of going there, but I had 2 years, the 2 best years of my education were at Avondale.
We're going to come back to that for sure. So this is your first foray then when you were at the University of Newcastle University or University of Newcastle?
Either.
Okay, either one. This is your first time, though, being in a non-Adventist university setting, right? What was that like?
It was disorienting. So having been to Adventist schools all my life and then doing subjects like philosophy and psychology, I can remember sitting in philosophy class and the lecturer came in, the professor came in and said, "I'm Professor Robinson." He said, "I used to be a lay pastor for the Methodist Church. I am now an atheist. But I don't think atheism needs any missionaries." And then he launched in. Psychology, I had atheist professors who actually were very antagonistic toward Christianity. So for me to be in an environment where first thing you do after class is you go down to the bar with all the other students. And so, it was disorienting for me.
Since you have said that you came into college and you still had not answered all of that within your heart, do you think that this widened that chasm, or did this start to actually build the bridge in your mind?
I don't think there was any particular progression that I can see. I think I wavered a little bit, I still clung to my faith in God. It was more in terms of, why Adventist,
So we believe God is real.
Yeah.
But what faith?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I think that for many people, it's like, okay, I believe the Bible.
Yeah.
I believe God. But does the faith that I was raised in really make sense to me?
I had to make it my own. Yeah.
So you go to Avondale.
Yes. Loved it.
You should have gone sooner. Although
probably.
Maybe these other years were actually beneficial for you.
It was for me, it was like 2 years of summer camp. I mean, just friends, activities, whatever. It was wonderful. My brother's philosophy was never let schoolwork get in the way of your education.
Never let schoolwork get in the way of your education. So I want him to be my teacher. I'm just saying, this could be a very fun teacher.
No, Avondale was great. I had good teachers, good friends. It was just really good.
So during these years, what degree were you going into at this
Teaching.
point? You're going to be a teacher.
Yeah.
You're pretty solid on that.
Yeah.
Right? Because God's not going to change your mind, right, Gary?
Well, I'm always open, but I was aiming for like a Bachelor of Education to be a teacher. Yeah.
Okay. So you go to school, become a teacher, and you said you had these great experiences there. I think all right, let's kind of help me out a little bit so I can try to figure this out. Do you have an experience, a point where it becomes real to you?
Not that I can point to that I can say on this day, whatever.
It just was a gradual progression.
Yeah.
So how did Avondale help aid in that?
I think the fact that the faith was being affirmed by teachers who I respected and who made sense. So they were teachers who were open-minded, but they were able to talk about faith in terms that made sense. And so I only just had a faith-affirming experience.
Do you think that sometimes we have a challenge with that? Speaking in faith in terms that make sense?
Oh, definitely. I think sometimes we take too much for granted. We talk in terms of cliches and we talk in terms of, well, it's just, we assume that you believe this, but we need to make sure that we have good reasons for our faith. We need to make sure that we make clear why we believe what we do, and we need to make sure that it's not faith is faith, but it's backed by evidence.
I like that. So you graduate from Avondale
Yes.
with your bachelor's in
education.
And you go and...
I was going to go back and do my, hang on, let me see here. So I went back to university and I did my honours year. They kind of like I think it's a British system where you do, after your undergraduate, you do what they call an honours year. And then after you do your honours year, then you can go on to your PhD. So I did my honours year back at Newcastle.
So it's like honours year, like a master's year?
It's pretty close.
Thing?
It's pretty close.
Okay. I'm like, since you're jumping to a PhD, I'm like, maybe that's the
yeah.
land
So you
in
can
between.
skip the masters if you do well enough in the. So then I was going to go on and do my PhD, but then I got a call to go to Science Publishing Company as an editor.
So Science Publishing Company, is this like Signs of the Times kind of? What is Signs Publishing?
It's the publishing house for the South Pacific Division. Okay. And so they print Signs magazine, the South Pacific Record. They had Good Health magazine and books.
Okay, so it's kind of like here in America, we have like the Review and Herald or Pacific Press. And there's Sophocles.
Yes.
It's a publishing house.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
So you serve as an editor. Did you serve as an editor over a particular?
So I was an associate editor of the South Pacific Record, Signs magazine, and editor of Good Health magazine.
So the South Pacific Record, this is the one where as a kid you want to know how to take the person's job. You're well on your way, Gary Krause.
I was well on my way. So the senior editor who called me to come, he was actually moving from America, and he used to be an assistant editor at the Adventist Review. So he called me to go, and I thought that'd be a nice experience for a couple of years. So I said yes, and I'll just defer my further study. So I went to Science Publishing Company, loved it.
So what was your favorite thing about working in Adventist Publishing?
I love writing and editing. I love words. I love anything to do with words, except speaking to you in an interview about my life. That's the only exception.
That's the only exception?
Yeah.
So otherwise
words.
You love every word. So if somebody else were to interview you.
No, it's not you. It's not you. It's the subject.
The subject.
Yeah.
So it's the life story thing. So far, I'm just going to say it's a 10 out of 10.
Oh, I'm
kind. Very much enjoying
You're
this.
very generous.
Actually, you're fun.
Thank you.
So some are very serious. You're fun. I'm really enjoying our conversation.
Thank you.
Just so you know. If somebody else isn't enjoying it, then they should, start from the beginning and work their way through this. So you love writing.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in particular that you really loved? Because those are three kind of different magazines. The Recorder is kind of about like what's happening in your area. The Signs is, I think, more like outreach, theology, like Bible stuff. And then the other one's health. Yeah. It sounded like. So that's kind of like a whole little spectrum that you have going on here. Do you have a specific one of those that you really kind of gravitated towards?
I think probably Signs magazine, because I've always been interested in how do we make Christianity real and attractive to people in a secular and post-Christian context, and that's what we were dealing with in Australia. So I liked the idea of writing not just for Adventists but for non-believers.
And it takes a special person to be able to do that, because you have to start to try to actually understand the mind. And so actually you having served for those, not served, well, in a way serving, but when you were at the University of Newcastle and you were taking psychology classes and these things in a secular university, it actually probably helped you to be able to understand a little bit more the mind of people in that environment than those of us who have gone through Adventist education our entire journey. I
think so. I can remember the first class. After they finished, they all headed down to the student union to have a drink. So I come down there and I ask for a lemonade, and one of the students says to me, "Why don't you drink alcohol?" And I'm thinking, why don't I drink alcohol? I've never had to say this before. And so I'm trying to think of all the reasons. And before I can answer, she says, "Is it because alcohol causes so much damage to families and the community?" And I said, that's it. That's it. So she gave me the answer. And so those sort of interactions, and then
she gave you the answer.
She gave me the answer. And then another occasion, I remember there was a lot of stress before the exams coming up. And I remember sharing that I hadn't studied at all over the day before, Saturday, and they said, "You what?" And I said, "I didn't do any study at all." And they said, "Why?" And I explained that, it's my day of rest. And I said, "So much better because I come to it so much more relaxed, etc., etc." And they're, "Oh, wow, maybe I'll try that." So it was an existential, experiential approach to the Sabbath. I didn't get out my Bible and say, "Here's the reason you keep it." But so that, I guess that probably...
And it was changed to Sunday, and
Right.
this is how it transforms your life.
Yeah, because they couldn't care less about the rest, honestly. They couldn't care less. They don't keep any day, so they don't care whether you go from Saturday to Sunday or whatever, or Sunday to Saturday. So I guess those sort of experiences taught me, helped me in that respect.
I remember the first time somebody asked me why I was a vegetarian, because I'd grown up in this whole Adventist thing, and I've been a vegetarian all my life, and vegan for many of those years. And then they asked me, and unlike you, where they gave you the great answer, they're like, "Will your church not allow you to do it? Is this like a rule?" I'm like, our church doesn't really have rules. This is not how the church works. But they had come from a religion where it was much more,
right.
This is how you do it. And I remember I was like, well, I'm a vegetarian, but then it's like I'm having to actually process, like, wait, why am I a vegetarian? Right. Because it's just what you do. Right. It's how I was raised.
And you never had to justify it before.
No. And actually, from that first time I actually answered that, it was really just like, well, it's been how I've been raised, and I don't hate what I'm doing. And eventually I got to the point where I could talk about from like the health benefits and just, all this. But at that point I was like, I don't know, because I am.
Yeah.
So it is intriguing. The more you kind of move outside of that Adventist community, those peculiarities, trying to explain them and understanding them, it's actually kind of a really important thing for us in understanding why our faith matters to us and why how it becomes internalized.
And so some people find it easy. Some people, they're just natural witnesses verbally, so they're in a context and they just relish the opportunity to share their faith. I struggle with it, if people start asking me, how can you believe in God, when an all-powerful God, when there's so much suffering in the world? It's stressful for me to work my way through on that conversation. I'm not Mark Finley. It doesn't come naturally to me. So I think those sort of experiences, though, are good because I don't say they build up resilience, but they build up an understanding of the mindset it's coming from.
And it helps us to understand. And helps us to learn how to articulate, even.
Yeah.
Because if we don't ever have to articulate, we will never
be
able to articulate it.
Exactly.
So look, I'm helping you articulate your life story.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah. So you're working as the associate editor for all of these different magazines.
Yes.
Was there any struggles, any challenges that you had that made it like you would have maybe gone to the secular route, or was the whole thing just, you always just loved it?
There were challenges. Like, for example, with Signs magazine, you are trying to reach a non-believing audience, but the people who are sponsoring the magazine are good, faithful Adventists. So, and good people who want to see a magazine that is going to reach out to the community. Now, many of them see that all we need to do is just preach our fundamental beliefs.
And everyone will accept it.
Yeah, whereas me coming from a communication background realized that communication is two ways, and if they don't understand it, if it's not meaningful, attractive and believable, they're not going to even look at it. So contextualizing the articles to meet people where they are, to reach people, sometimes scared some of the supporters because they thought, you're watering down the faith, et cetera, et cetera. So even today, it's an issue that faces us in contextualization of how do we make the gospel attractive, meaningful, and understandable to people in other cultural contexts? Because some people just say, well, just preach the word, that's what we need to do. But, if I'm talking to a Muslim friend and I read to him from the 28 fundamental beliefs, half of them he wouldn't even begin to understand without some sort of an explanation, without putting it into his context. So effective witness is always, like Jesus did, reaching people where they are, not just sharing where we're at, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does, because this seems to always be this, it kind of becomes this battle, because I'm in communication as well, obviously, but this, how do we make how do we actually share what we need to share with people while not angering the people who are actually paying for what you're doing? Because they think that they know best.
Sure.
Because they in their mind think, if we just do this, but it's not necessarily something they've studied or like researched, but in their mind they know. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't work for some people.
Sure.
Like, absolutely, go read from the 28 fundamental beliefs. But in a post-Christian country, they just need to figure out, like, what is truth?
Yeah.
Do I believe the Bible matters? Like, they aren't worried about the investigative judgment. They just need to understand, like, so many other things.
Right.
And we need to learn how to take them through the right process.
Mm-hmm.
Our Muslim brothers and sisters, our Buddhist brothers and sisters, if they are open to the idea of exploring Christianity, what are the steps we take them to? Because you don't just start at the end.
No.
And I can see, I was wondering if in that publishing you struggled with that, because it seems to be a common wrestling that those of us in the communication field have to go through, because we have the internal and the external, and sometimes those clash.
Yeah. And after there, I went to the Adventist Media Centre in Sydney, and of course you have the same tension. You're trying to produce TV programs and materials for a secular audience in terms that they will relate to. And, you know, it's hard for some of the people in the pew to say, well, why are you doing that? Why aren't you just preaching the straight message?
Or why aren't you making content for us?
Well,
which is also another challenge.
Yeah, sure.
So how many years were you up at the publishing house?
I think it was like 6 years. Yeah.
6 years? Okay. So there's at some point, and you're going to have to kind of like make sure that you guide the conversation to the right thing, because there's a really beautiful woman who comes in the story. So you're going to just need to let me know
it happened in those 6 years.
Okay, so see, I didn't want to like all of a sudden have us jump without knowing about the beautiful woman.
I appreciate that. So I was invited to speak to a group of university students in Queensland. And the university students, some of them had invited a young woman from the University of Queensland to come for the weekend. And I happened to see her, and our eyes locked across a crowded room. And I was smitten. Hardly said a word to her, but I was smitten. I went back to Melbourne, and I was sharing a house with someone who went to school with her. So being the coward that I am, I got him to call her father, get her phone number, and that was the start.
And her name is
Bettina.
Yes. And what was Bettina majoring in? Law. Okay, so when you move to, you just said the media center
in Sydney,
are you already in a relationship? Where are we at with this?
We actually got married, and she joined me down there at Science Publishing Company in Warburton for, I think we were probably there for a year, maybe 2 years. Then we went to Sydney.
Okay.
There it is.
There.
The beautiful story.
Bettina's beautiful.
She is beautiful.
Love Bettina. I mean, not just physically. She's just a beautiful person. She radiates joy.
Well, when we got engaged, my brother said that she had a Mother Teresa complex to help the poor unfortunates.
Is that why she married you?
That's what he was implying, which is very unkind, right?
That is very unkind. It sounds like something a brother would say.
It may be true, but it's unkind.
She is. She just, whenever I see Bettina, she just has this beautiful smile. She just radiates joy wherever she goes.
I'm a very lucky man.
You are. She's also a lucky woman.
You're very kind.
So you both moved to the Adventist Media Center. And what are you doing at the Media Center?
So I was creative director. So I was writing scripts, helping make videos, that sort of thing.
So for who? Who's your audience?
Our audience was TV.
Okay. So it's television that you're working in.
Yeah. So, and then on top of that, we also made videos for an Adventist audience. So we would do videos on various topics that one of the unions would commission us to do. So I remember once we did one on baptism, one aimed at teenagers to encourage them to consider baptism. We did another one on sexual abuse. So we did various videos commissioned to us by church entities. But what I really enjoyed was producing stuff for television. Yeah.
You know, something that I'm starting to hear kind of as this recurring thing is that you really love trying to figure out how to help not necessarily our members, but to help those who are interested and open to understanding that contextualization really matters. That because everything that you've liked so far,
Yes, that's true.
it's not just writing.
No,
It's writing for a very specific audience.
that's true.
And which explains a lot more about your current role, because you can see this heart being built in you from a very young age, that God was creating different skill sets, but even within those skill sets, your heart for mission and for really making it matter deeply to somebody was already being like born and inside your heart. And I'm loving the progression and hearing how God is just warming your heart and preparing you to be able to help really talk to our brothers and sisters around the world.
Thank you.
So you serve, were there any specific programs or anything? And speaking of all that stuff, what were some of the specific programs you enjoyed working on?
Well,
do you remember them?
We actually moved into a stage where we were, you'd do a program and it would be slotted in at 3:00 Sunday morning on, like, the Australian context was like we had the ABC, which was the government sponsored broadcasting network.
Okay.
Then you had 3 commercial channels. So there weren't a whole lot of, like, there weren't 50 million channels like you have today available that people get on cable or whatever.
This was back in what, 1940?
Back in the 30s. And so if you had a program, you might be able to get it on at 3:00 Sunday morning. So what they moved toward was actually doing targeted advertisements. So like 30-second ads, 15-second ads, 60-second ads, and then have a little teaser where you would then have people call in for coping with life's crises. And we would send you a cassette, or we'd send you a
cassette.
Yeah, I'll explain it to you later.
Yeah, it's okay. I had them. I remember winding them up with pencils.
Yeah.
Don't worry. My daughter just bought a cassette player because
it's retro. It's
cool now. It's cool again.
Yeah. So it was basically doing the ads that would then connect them to get a product from us, so we could make those connections, which would then try to build up to the Bible correspondence school connection. So yeah, we did a whole lot of those sorts of things.
So you're creating these ads, and because of your desire for this contextualization to reach people where they're at, what do you think were your greatest challenges that you were able to overcome when you were running these ads?
Well, I think that every phone call we got was a victory, that we had actually been able to, from where we were, break down the barriers of people's perception of religion and Christianity and church and whatnot, and actually reach out physically to make a phone call to get something that we were offering them. I think that was every call was a victory.
Do you know if there were baptisms that eventually ensued from?
There were, but I couldn't give you numbers.
I don't need numbers,
No.
but and that, often our work, we don't know.
No.
So it's neat that you were able to create a product that led people to study. It was watered and it was planted, and eventually you were able to know that there was a harvest.
Well, I remember talking to one guy who had seen our ad and contacted me, and he was an atheist, and he said, but I want my daughter to look at both sides of the picture, so I'm interested in getting your content so that she can see the opposing view. So that was kind of nice.
That's intriguing.
Yeah.
So you serve in this role. How long were you?
5 years.
5 years. So where does Gary Krause go next?
Well, Gary Krause went home for lunch one day, which was just across the road, and there was a voicemail message from Elder Mike Ryan at the General Conference asking whether I would be interested in coming as Communication Director for Global Mission. I hadn't even heard of Global Mission. So...
What's that?
Right. But so there was nothing further from my radar of going to the GC to communication, whatever. But anyway, long story short.
What is Global Mission?
Alyssa, Global Mission is an initiative voted by the General Conference session in 1990 to reach unreached people groups and start new groups of believers. See, 30-something years later from 1990, I know what that is. Are you impressed?
I am.
Okay.
So here's the thing. What I've actually learned, like how you felt with responding to that call, I think is how most Adventists know.
Sure.
Or feel.
I'm
They
sure.
actually don't know most of the initiatives that are happening. Even at conference levels, they sometimes miss it, but let alone union or division or general conference. I was talking to a bunch of young people actually today at lunch, and I was asking them, has your time working in this building this summer helped you to understand the church better? Do you feel you understand it slightly better? And all of them were just saying that they didn't realize how global we were. They didn't understand so many of these different departments. We have people who came and spoke to them each week. And it just really opened their eyes that we aren't just like, you don't just go to a church, that there's this huge, beautiful organization that serves the world.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's funny because actually I think when we first met, I thought that Adventist Mission sent missionaries.
Yes.
And I found out that's not what you do. So I think that there's just perceptions. We don't actually know what people do.
Sure.
So you say yes?
So we thought about it, we talked about it, we prayed about it, we worked our way through it. And I mean, going to the other side of the world for something like this, we weren't really sure. But then we decided that I can also remember calling my mother and talking to her about it. And there was this silence at the end of the phone. I said, Mum, it's on the other side of the world, hardly get home. She said, well, Gary, when I was 21, we got on a boat to go to Fiji. There was no furlough back to Australia. There was no phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. She said, it's a very different world. And I felt a little humbled that my sacrifice in the days of internet and annual leaves and all that sort of thing, I was hardly making a sacrifice to come here. So we decided to come.
So a lot of people, they think, it's like, oh, you're working at the general conference.
Does anyone think that now?
People do. Some people do.
Okay.
I remember actually when I walked in here, I was very humbled to have been called here. What were your thoughts? The general conference is calling you. This isn't a union division. The general conference is calling you and saying, we need you to help Global Mission as a communication leader. Was there just kind of the sense of like, me? Or
No, I thought you've chosen the best qualified person. Yeah, of course.
Thank you for your humility, Gary.
Yeah, no, of course. I thought, why me? I mean, I'm on the outskirts of the Southern Hemisphere. Why on earth would you be wanting to call me? Of course I had that feeling. And then when I came here I was called over for some meetings before I actually took the job on, and that was to kind of look over things. And honestly, Alyssa, I can remember walking into this building. It was so quiet. People were hidden behind their cubicles. You could hear a little bit of keyboards, whatnot, and I'm walking down. And I'd come from the environment at the media center where it was loud, laughter, da-da-da. And I thought, what have I done? And because it was just like a different climate, different atmosphere, different universe. And so it takes time to acclimatize to things. And of course, you find kindred spirits, and I've loved every minute. Well, not every minute, but most minutes working here since then. So, and yes, of course, it's a privilege and it's an honor, and this imposter syndrome thing.
I know it well, Gary.
You always say, why am I doing this? And I'm sure 50,000 other people could be doing it, but I have the privilege to be able to do it. So.
It's interesting because it doesn't even matter, I think, sometimes your age, your gender, your ethnicity, any of this. Like when you kind of walk in, it's kind of like, okay, I know this person, this person, this person, this person. I'm pretty sure they could do this way better than me. And you kind of struggle with this, but you are the person who's been called.
Yeah.
And only God knows why sometimes we've been called.
But I've really been blessed too, Alyssa, with good mentors. So when I was at Science Publishing Company, Jim Coffin came as the senior editor. Wonderful boss. I mean, the amount of stuff he taught me. I mean, within the first week or two of the job, he sat down with the policy book with me and he went through every single benefit that I was eligible for as an employee. Explained it all to me right through there. In teaching me to edit on the computer, he would sit behind me looking over my shoulder as I'm editing so that he can help me. So he was terrific, just taught me so much,
That's actually beautiful because that's something that's often missing is this mentorship thing that it's not, he wasn't looking over your shoulder to like, it's to help you grow. And when you know that someone's trying to help you grow, it's totally life-changing. And especially, you were saying, even just like taking you through the policy book to let you know what was yours to have. It's not kind of like, if he doesn't take this and it helps us out financially. It's like, no, I want you to live this life fully. I want you to know what is your due. And I love that. I think that's fantastic to have a mentor like that.
Yeah, and then when I came here, Mike Ryan, my boss, was just fantastic. I mean, just supportive, showing me things, helping me learn, helping me navigate any mistakes I made. Just, I've just been really blessed.
So you made mistakes?
Only every hour.
So I ask that because sometimes we have this feeling that like we should never acknowledge that we've made mistakes.
Right.
It's kind of scary. But it sounds like he actually created this environment that you may have made a mistake, but it's okay. Yeah. What did you learn from it? Which is also another great thing a mentor can do is like we all will make mistakes.
Yeah.
The worst thing we can do is make people think that they were the mistake.
Yeah, that's right.
And
yes, so Mike, I would do things that wouldn't be the way Mike would have done it, but his approach was always, there's not necessarily one right way to do this. It may not be the way I would do it, but all power to you and I'll support you. So,
well, I think another thing is that, especially something I've noticed, I've now served in this position. I'm Assistant Director of Communication. I've been here for almost exactly 1 year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The thing is that I'm starting to, you have to understand this global perspective. You have to understand how to work within a system. And there's like so many little nuances and you sit in a meeting and it's like, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say anything here. It's like you're constantly trying to figure out like all of these things. And because it's not just like this American company, which would be great because I'm an American, it's this global organization. It's like I have to understand how to talk to different people. We're going to make a lot of mistakes.
Sure. Yeah.
And the greatest gift we have are people who are helping us to learn from those mistakes. So you serve as a communication leader, director.
Yes.
And what did you do in this role besides communicate?
Yeah, so I would go and gather stories, video stories and stories for magazines. We had a page in the Adventist Review for a few years which was focused on global mission stories and activities. We had our donor publications that we would send out to donors, and I had a small team that helped with that, so we had donor response, etc. But basically we also had a TV program, so we had TV publications. At that stage, we didn't have social media or anything like that. But basically anything that would get the news out, carrier pigeon, whatever it is to get out the message about church planting, global mission.
So Adventist mission
and
global mission, how do they work together?
Okay, so in 2010, I think, I hope I'm right, leaders decided that they would take two offices, the Office of Global Mission and the Office of Mission Awareness, together, take those two offices and put them under one umbrella, and they called it Adventist Mission. So Adventist Mission, where I now work, cares for global mission, church planting, and cares for mission awareness. So telling church members about mission around the world, what their mission offerings are accomplishing.
Mission spotlights.
Even the new mission spotlight.
Well, I remember the mission spotlights back in the day when they were in a carousel.
And the little ding told you.
Click,
yeah.
click.
Yeah.
My dad was in control of that clicking, and I remember this sound. It's one of those special childhood memories.
The sound of growing up Adventist, right?
Yes, that's so true. Okay, so you're serving in this role as the director of communication.
Yeah.
How long did you serve in that role?
I think it was probably maybe 8 years, something like that.
Where do you go from there?
I was director of the Office of Mission Awareness for about a year before they then put it under the umbrella of Adventist Mission. Then I became the director of Adventist Mission.
And that was,
2000.
I'm going to guess, voted at a GC. I mean, the position was at a GC session?
I think it was just a AdCom. Oh, no, me.
I was just thinking, because 2010 would be a GC session year,
that's right.
so I wasn't sure if like the first...
Yeah, I guess I started being elected then. Up until then, I was appointed. Yeah.
Okay. What do you see as you reflect back on your journey?
Yeah.
All the ways that God has led you. I can see some very, very obvious movements that God has led you in your life. What, as you look back, do you see as kind of like these signs of his faithfulness to you? As you've kind of continued to progress in all of these different roles, none being greater than another, because they are all just in service to him. But how do you see how God has shown you his faithfulness through these years?
You know, some people have their life kind of mapped out with their goals and their, what I want to do in 2, 3. I've never been like that. So I've taken every year as it comes. And I just feel that God has sustained me at every step of the way, that despite my weaknesses and my failures, that he's always reliable and that he's cared for me better than I could have been expected. He blessed me with a wife. Then later in our marriage, he blessed us with a little girl. And I've never had any reason to complain about him. He's always been there. And I guess, I referenced earlier, times of sickness that I've had. And it's probably through those times, when I've come through that times, that I've actually come closest to God, which kind of seems to be strange. But in some ways, you are more dependent on him in those moments when you're not feeling well, you're not sure what's going to happen tomorrow. It's in those moments that I feel most closely connected to God. So I don't know. I don't see signs and wonders and angels in everything that happens, but I think as I look at my life, I can see this gentle presence of God there sustaining me.
Gary, as we wrap up, if there was one thing that you just really wish that you could share with all of those people listening, what would that one thing be?
Oh dear. One thing that I can share with the listeners.
I'll even let you have 2 if you want to.
Well, since I'm working with Adventist Mission, I want to just direct your attention to the fact that in our mission here, the best thing we can do is follow Christ's method of ministry, which is to mingle with people, show sympathy to them, minister to needs, win confidence, and then bid them to follow Jesus. So we're called to a holistic mission, and that's what I'd like to emphasize. And then I just want to say, whatever you're going through, any challenges you have, any questions you have, any times when you're feeling that God's let you down, just cling to the fact that even though you don't feel it, Jesus still loves you. Sounds a little glib, but that's the basis. I mean, that's the only reason I'm here, because Jesus loves me. And we go back to that song we used to sing, Jesus loves me, this I know. And that's the thing that we have to cling through the good times and the bad times.
Gary, 10 out of 10, 5 stars, would do it again.
Thank you so much.
That's my Alyssa review.
Thank you for helping me through it.
I've really enjoyed spending this time with you.
Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of A&N Profiles with my guest, Gary Krause. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast, the YouTube channel, wherever it is that you're tuning in today, because I don't want you to miss any future episodes. And you can also go back and watch past episodes. So thanks for spending this time with us, and join me next week as I continue to get to know the life stories of more inspiring people.